Hey y'all, this is Joseph with 3D Source. We're going to be talking about the SpeakEars, which is my little mount that I made for my speakers that go on the side of the Ultrawide. I felt like they looked kind of like ears in a way, so that's how I came up with the name. They're 3D printed and relatively straightforward, but I did make some mistakes as I started the design. You can see here, these are all failed designs, so I'll take you through how those didn't work and then how I finally came up with something that actually did work okay. So hopefully y'all take something away from this and can use it in your own design. So thank you for watching, hope you enjoy it.
So one of the first things I did was look for the radius of the curve of the screen that I have, and this is the specifications of the screen, and I found this website that actually does have the radius of curvature, which is this 3800 millimeters, so that's useful just for establishing the base curvature of the screen. So now we'll jump into Fusion 360 and I'll show you what I did. First, I'm trying to basically reverse engineer the speakers, and this was just the original outline. They have this little tiered structure, so that's what you see here. So this would actually be like the front of the speaker, and they have a little groove kind of right there. So if we look at it from the right side, you can see how it tapers off there. So that's something that I had to account for when making the basically casing that holds it in place, or the mount. So now we just continue along the timeline. So this was just a attempt to try and make a outer casing or outer mount to make sure that it fit okay. And the idea was that since it is tapered, basically you take this piece and you can push it in like that until it gets into position. So now we have that body, and I actually printed something off like that just to test it so I wouldn't waste any filament, even though I went on to waste a lot of filament. But that did confirm that it fits okay. So this was one of the first prints that I made. It was just a rim around the speaker, and you can see here the idea was just to fit this and see if that was the right size. And as I mentioned in the CAD, this was tapered or angled a little bit, so it was important to make sure that fit. And this would actually go on the back and then slide forward, and that's how this is made too. So again, it's kind of press fit in there. Another way you could think about it is if I pulled really hard, that's how it would come out, but hopefully it's in there good enough to stay fit. Okay, so now since I got I guess that was the first step, was to make sure that I could fit something around the speaker. So that was completed at that point. So now this is that radius. This is a 3800 millimeter radius. So if we look at this sketch, you'll see here that it's 3800 millimeters. So what I was doing was leaving the speaker in place and then just giving me a guide as far as where the radius would be. And again, I'm only working on one speaker just because I know that the other side is symmetric and I can just flip everything at the end. And this was the other part of that sketch. So what I did here was I measured the thickness of the screen at the edge, which was apparently 20 millimeters. And then it does have a different radius at the back side than the screen does. So I basically just had to estimate this. I think I printed off a couple of different versions to check the fit of it, but ended up saying that that was 25 millimeters, and just kind of estimated the radius of that, and then made the thickness, the wall thickness, 3 millimeters just to start off. And we'll see with the actual printed off versions that ended up changing that at the end, but this was again just to try to get things going. So that's what I had there. And then you can imagine the screen is essentially here. Okay, so this is the top, and then this is down the side. And then this is the cutout. So this is where the screen would kind of slot in. There was the idea. and I have some print off versions of that. And I go in and cut this off here in a second. I cut out the front so that you could see the whole screen. So then I moved on to this version. I think this is actually for the top, so it's probably like that. And the idea here was just to make sure that I could just slot this on like that. And was testing generally just how all that fit together. Also test the width here of those pieces. So that was another thing I tested. This is where things started changing a little bit from the original design, and this whole time I was really thinking about how to print this without supports. So that's something you have to consider when you're 3D printing. So I knew that if I split this in half here, that I could put this piece on the plate of the 3D printer, and then this piece on the plate of the 3D printer, and just print up. And as long as I tapered this by like a 45, then I wouldn't need any supports on the inside of this. So that was what originally motivated me to do it this way. And that was actually successful as far as printing it off. And but I did change this design some. I originally had this design where it was a circle and tapered, and I'll show that to y'all. But ultimately that didn't work for a variety of reasons, which I'll explain here. This was my first full iteration, and this is what I mean by these are essentially symmetric, and just split it there down the middle. And the idea was I would print this off and then put this on the top, and then also put this on the bottom. But before I did that, I actually made it to where I could put a little column cylinder in the middle and then super glue them together. So before I attached everything, I would print off a column, stick it in both of those, and then glue them together like that. And so that's what this one is. So you should be able to see there's the seam, and it's a little slight discoloration, but that's the super glue. I don't know how easy it is to tell that. But this was like the first actual functioning version. I think this one was a little bit too loose. So that's when I printed off this version here. And this is basically the same thing. You can see the cylinder in there, but you'll notice that it's broken half. So this cylinder ran the entire distance, basically like that long or so. And I just had a bunch of super glue in it to keep them together. And this is the same thing on this side. Another thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about this little column reinforcement design that I did was, if I had to do it over again, I would have made this into a hexagon. And the reason for that is, to print this circular column thing, you have to print the column, sitting upright. But if you used a hexagon shape instead of this, so basically just imagine the same thing but as a hexagon, you could print it flat, because the hexagon has 6 flat sides. So that would have made this a lot stronger, because then the filament is running this way instead of running like it is with the cylinder. So that would have made everything a lot stronger, and that would have just been a better way to design it, and it would have been easier to print because it's just laying down long ways instead of trying to make a tall thin structure. So that's something that I would have done differently, and I've actually done that in some current designs where I use hexagons a lot more than circles for reinforcement stuff like this. So that's just something to consider. So this version actually did fit okay, and the way that it worked was, let's glue these together, hang them up on the side, kind of like that one. And then I made this piece, which was the first full speaker mount. And you can see here that this part's tapered upwards, as I mentioned, and it had this. So the way that this worked was, you'll see here that this is closed on one end, right? And I printed this on the printer face down like that. So I did have to have supports inside of here, which really broke my heart a little bit, but they actually came out okay. It was just supports, you know, through that. You can imagine these sliding on like that, and then you would have that holding it from sliding any further. So give me just a second, I'll actually try to put these back together. All right, so put the camera down, kind of show you all how it was going together here. So hopefully I can just snap it into place. So that is how it looked, obviously with the speaker inside of it. But I actually like this design a little bit better, to be honest, because it's a little more simplistic. Obviously that one's pretty fat on the edge, and this one is a lot slimmer. So it's a little bit more minimalistic, which is what I like. And I actually like this color better. I kind of wish I would have printed the other ones in this color, but I ran out of it. So, you know, why did I not stick with this design? Well, the problem was they started breaking here at the top. And I couldn't really figure out what was going on initially. I thought maybe it wasn't tight enough and it was just sliding off, because these are really just press fit into place. So, and the speakers actually fell like off my desk a couple of times, so I'm actually pretty surprised that they still work. I would just hear this big bang every now and then that I knew that the speakers had fallen. So it actually happened a couple of times, and I thought initially, like I said, that they were just falling off because I thought the clamp like on the top and bottom wasn't strong enough. So my original thought process behind why the speakers were falling was, I thought that the clamping pressure was not strong enough. So I thought that the speakers were kind of just sliding off the sides of the monitor and then hitting the ground. And then I thought the impact from hitting the ground was breaking the tops off. So that was what I was originally thinking. But in hindsight, what was actually happening was the speakers were falling because the tops were breaking off, just due to that stress buildup in that corner. So that's just how I was thinking about things originally. So that's why I ended up making this version, where it was the slot version. So instead of this where it kind of slid on the top, these slide in this way. And what that does is it basically binds it into place right there. So it acts kind of as like a clamp on these two pieces. So I thought that was an improvement. I didn't have to use glue anymore. I didn't have to use this like column thing anymore. So I thought the clamp was a good idea, but I kept having the same thing happen. So then I was like, okay, well, it's definitely not the clamp. And I think I reduced like the top size, like the width of this a little bit. So it was actually a pretty tight fit. So I knew it wasn't just falling because it wasn't tight enough at this point. So that's when I graduated to this design. And so here I'm starting to make the final design. You can see that these are the slots that I made, and this is just going to press in to there like that. And so now you can imagine you mount the top and bottom and then press this in, and then you'll make a little lock in the back here. So this is my little locking mechanism. It's going to lock these into place. You really don't even need it, just because the fit here is pretty tight, but that's what I made. And then now the rest of this is just kind of doing some finishing touches on it. And then I expanded these out just to make it stronger. So again, the reason that the original versions failed was there's a big stress point here. And what was happening is over time, because that was not very thick and the other models, it started to, even if the glue held and everything else, it started to create a stress point and it ultimately would break along those layer lines there. And this was previously pretty thin, so I think that was about where the other versions cut off. So there wasn't a whole lot of plastic there holding it in place, and that was why it kept breaking in that location. So I made that a lot thicker to try to help reduce those issues. And so far, it hasn't broken, so hopefully it'll stay that way. And then this was just making a mirror image for the other side. So there are my two versions. I had to do this little cutout here because there were inputs on this side, so I had to make a little space for those. But this is the CAD of it, and now I'll show you all the real version. All right, so here's the final version of the SpeakEar. You see back here how it all works together. There's the top piece, the bottom piece, this little key, and then these pegs are actually part of this speaker. So from the front, you can see that the speaker is here, and so the pegs are actually just straight through there. So that's all one big solid piece. So that kind of locks everything into position. This is that cutout that I mentioned for the USB sticks down there, or the USB inputs. And you can see here how the speaker is wedge shaped. So this is really just wedged in there. There's not anything really holding it other than just press fit, but it's tight enough to keep it in place. The major critique I have about this that I wish I would have come up with something different is this fillet here looks pretty horrible, and it's the same thing on the bottom. Whereas if you see this fillet is nice and pretty. So the reason for that, this is printed face down, so the printer can easily do fillets in that direction, whereas this is printed with this on the bed plate. So if you imagine, this is the old version. So if you imagine this on the bed plate, it's printed just like that without any supports. And the reason I did that or made that decision was basically any other orientation, you're going to have a lot of supports. So if you print it like this, it doesn't need any supports. If you print it like this, it's not flat on the back. So if you can see that, it's going to need some support somewhere. And you have this really important dimension here, this overhang, that would also need supports. And then having to clean these out would be a hassle, because this is really important, because that's what fits around the actual monitor itself. So this is one of the really important dimensions, and anytime you have support, sometimes that'll throw off the dimensions. So I basically picked kind of the lesser of two evils and made the fillets there ugly. I could have made them squared off and they would have looked fine, but then that wouldn't have really matched this curve. So maybe if I go back and do it again, I would just make them both chamfered. Generally those look better, but in general it serves its purpose, but I'm not super happy with how this part in particular looks. But overall it works for what I need it to do, and if I ever have time I'll change it with another revision. But anyway, I just wanted to show you all that. Hope that y'all enjoyed this, and if you like the video, please consider subscribing, and hopefully see y'all in the next one. Thank you.